Hi and welcome to another episode. What we've got here is everything to do with what I've purchased, sitting patiently for the Spectrum Next. Please see the sarcasm in my eyes. No, I have been waiting somewhat patiently. Of course, I want to get my sticky little fingers on it since the day that they said they were going to make it. But things happen, things have to be sorted out, and I'd rather that they did their very best to bring out the best product they could do instead of just going, here you go, mate. So, yes, I've been waiting patiently. The what I've bought over the time that I've been waiting is bits and pieces so that when it does arrive, I've got stuff to play with and, all that sort of stuff. So let's start off with this cable. It's just the Spectrum Next. Doesn't come with a power switch built in. Don't know why they didn't build one in, but they didn't. Mainly, I think it's because the original Spectrum, actually all the original Spectrums didn't have a power switch built in. You did it at the wall. That was common practice back in the day, for lots of different things, not just for computers. I realised the Commodore 64 had a built-in switch, but it had a better keyboard. Let's be honest, it did. But anyway, you can buy these sort of switches. I think this initially built for the idea of if your light switch doesn't have one or something, Be careful though, because you can buy them that the switch will flick in a certain direction for whatever you bought it for. So this particular one, to turn it on, now let's remember the power's going that way. Turn it on, I press that because there's a little one, a little dash there, and the other side is off. I might have maybe should have bought one the other direction, but it doesn't really matter. As long as it turns off and on, it doesn't really matter. But if you want to be particularly picky, watch out for which side the on direction actually is. And the other thing that I bought was a stereo, 3.5mm stereo to 3.5mm mono. I'm not too sure which one's going to be which, because obviously the Spectrum has ear and mic, or at least the tape decks do. This is the bit that goes into the Spectrum Next. This particular cable is made by Kenable. It's about 50 centimeters long. You can buy them like a meter long as well, but I bought 50 centimeters because I was guessing that a meter would probably far too long, which is about 3 feet for people that don't use meters. So I bought this one. Hopefully it works. It should do, because it's the equivalent of what would have gone for a Spectrum Plus 3, which had a 3-inch disk drive built in, but it didn't have the tape deck like the Plus 2 did. So you had to go back and use a tape deck like you would have done with the 48K machines, or the original 128K. But with those ones, you got mono at both ends. At this end to go into the tape deck, and mono to go into the computer. Whereas the Plus 3, from what I understand, because I never actually owned the Plus 3, it had stereo, a jack, and it did it that way instead. So if you're looking around and you find a Spectrum Plus 3 cable, that should work as long as it is 3.5mm stereo at one end, because that's the bit that goes into the computer, that's the bit that goes into the tape deck. The other thing that I bought is from Retro Computer Shack. This guy hand builds the cables himself. I've had, I think it's for the Amstrad that I've got one. He builds very high quality, and I like how he messes around and makes a little stickers and everything to match up, so it's ready to say Spectrum Next, so you don't get confused what it is for later on. But basically this will give me RGB out of the Spectrum Next. The Spectrum Next has HDMI out already, but the timings, I don't understand about the programming enough, but what happens is that for some stuff where people have really pushed the Spectrum, as far as I understand, the timings of things are a little bit off, and so you don't get the full effect of what that person was wanting you to see on your CRT TV back in the day, or even modern demos and things like that. So it's kind of recommended that you get yourself a VGA or RGB cable. You can get VGA, so it'll look like this on both ends, and it goes into a VGA monitor, or you can get one with Scart, so that it goes into the back of your Scart TV. Now obviously what I'm going to be doing is sticking it into my OSSC so that I can capture and all that fun stuff. This cable also has a 3.5mm stereo jack on it, so you can get the nice wonderful audio out of the Spectrum Next. So let's move that out of the way. And then what I've also bought while I've been waiting is this is a ComCon. I really wanted one of these when I was a kid because there was games I were not allowed to play in case I broke the keyboard, because the computer wasn't actually mine. So it meant that there was a few games that I didn't get to play as a kid. Oh, woe is me! But this replaces the keyboard, as it were. So as you can see, it has up, down, left, right, fire button 1 and fire button 2, which I find interesting, because I didn't know that the original, or maybe this was so that you could, because it actually pushes away to the keys, and I know that some games did actually let you have up, down, left, right and fire, and then it'd be annoying and like you'd have to press space or something like that to do a second thing on the keyboard. Again, I wasn't allowed to play those. But if you had a 2-button joystick, which were around back in the day, because the likes of the Commodore could allow for 2 buttons. So, and I'm sure there was probably other joysticks out there that allowed for 2 buttons. I know an awful lot of joysticks only did 1 fire button, even though it was like 2 on the main joystick stem and a couple on the base, and the truth is all of them were the same. But there were joysticks that maybe like the trigger one was different from the top button and things like that. There's my phone making wonderful noises. So what I'll do is stick a joystick like that in here and see what happens. Because I do have some for the Commodore 64, and then we'll see what happens with that. But as I say, what would happen is, say like we've got the up here, so that's already been mapped to number 5, and so on and so forth. So we can either make it match the Sinclair interface, or you can make it match was it Cursor and ProTech, which are basically the same thing, or you can just mess around and do it to whatever keys that you'd like them to be, and then depending if the game has been preset to certain keys, you can mess around and put them in the right place, or if it's got a chance of redefining the keys, you can make it something a little bit more sensible to you, so that you can plug them in the same way, and then you should be able to play. And it's also got a through port, so hopefully this works. Not having a Spectrum, I've not been able to test it. Hopefully it works and doesn't fry the Spectrum Next, because that is things that I'm a little bit worried about with that. The same with this. This is USpeech. Again, this is something I would love to have had as a kid. Now, it does speech, obviously, hence the name. There were some games that used it. There was more games that used this than there were for other speech type devices. But I believe the one thing I'm going to have to do is mod it, because it uses the RF lead, which of course Spectrum Next isn't going to be doing. But I believe it's possible to mess around with the cables or solder something inside, so that you get the sound directly off of the chip instead of it being modulated and stuck down the RF. We'll figure that out when it comes to it. I remember reading about it, and that's why I bought one. I haven't done the mod because there was no point doing the mod, because I've not got a Spectrum, blah blah blah. And then other things what I've got, look at that pretty picture for now, is this. Now this is an edge connector. The whole idea being you stick it in the back of the Spectrum, and then it's got an extension port as well. As you can see, this is just normal, like pin type boards. So obviously the Spectrum stuff isn't going to fit directly onto that. So that's why I've bought these. So let's have a look. I'm not going to force it in, but it would sit like that. They are a bit too wide, but most of these ports have open-ended anyway on both sides. So if I solder some wire, I would then have 3 ports. Now I've got plenty of pins. I've not brought them to show in the video because obviously everyone knows what they look like. But this is the fancy bit of cable that I bought. I'm not too sure what it was off, but there's lots of pins and there's lots of wires, and obviously I've used it for something already that I needed a bit of wire for, so I'll trim that off and then make it fit. In fact, I've gone all the way down to here at this point. I'll trim this off and then make the necessary extensions for the cables for the pins to these. So this is an awful lot of soldering, so I've got to solder them all down that side and then do it all again on that side. So all 3 of them. I don't want to make the cables too long because that can cause interference and blah blah blah. But my idea is that with these, at least when I'm plugging and unplugging, I'm not going to damage the port to the back of the Spectrum. The other idea that I've also kind of got, because I doubt I'm probably only ever going to have these 2 other devices. So what I might do is solder from here and then solder directly onto this, so that I can then plug that into there. You know, so a bit of cable going from here to there, and then that means then I've got an extension cable and not have to ruin the port on the back of the Spectrum next. I probably have to carve down the sides because this one's actually enclosed. And I realise there's a pin that needs to make sure it's, you know, I'm pointing it the right way around. I'll sort that out probably the same way that the person who made this, which basically is that they get some pliers in, pull out the connection and drive a nail through to make sure that, and then trim it off to make sure that you actually are putting it the right way around. That's the idea anyway. So you might want to look up ZX X board. It's designed by Jiira, Jiiira. Again, I'll put links on there, the description. And then I, over Christmases and things like that in the past couple of years, my loving wife has got me the annuals, the Crash annuals, and all different things from the Kickstarters, which means I ended up getting games. So we've got, which I still haven't played, Egghead. So this is just a normal 48k or 128k game. There's nothing special about this for the next, but I haven't managed to play it. I'm being careful because these are tapes and there is magnets on this board, so I don't want to put them in the wrong place, so I'm putting these over here. So there we go, another 48k game. Squeaky squeak. But let's get this other game, although it's not an actual Spectrum Next extension. I bought this, when did I buy this? This one I got for, I think it was Blackpool a couple of years ago, because I thought I was getting a Spectrum Next pretty soon. At least I had hoped, because by then it was still kind of late, but you know, I really had hoped it was going to be out by that 2018 Christmas. But I had a Commodore 64, I don't have a VIC-20, I don't have a C16, I don't have an Atari, I do have an MSX, I don't have an Auric, still waiting on the Spectrum, and I do have an Amstrad. So I've played this on the Amstrad and the MSX, and it plays lovely. And so to make it fit all those different machines, there's 3 different tapes. And it's a cute little game. It's a bit like Pac-Man. In fact, I would say it's a bit like Pac-Man. But it kind of pushes the computers a little bit further, from what I can tell anyway, for the machines that I've played it on. And it plays really nicely. So yes, I've played it on MSX and I played it on the Amstrad, and I'll get to play on the Spectrum one day. Now these ones, ooh, don't want to drop all of this. Don't laugh if I do. So these are games specially made for the Spectrum Next. This is the first gold compilation that they brought out. So Dungeonette, what's that one? Delta Star and Montana Mike. And you could buy them individually, but I was a little bit late to the game, as it were, because I was wanting to wait for the Spectrum Next, and then there was like a deal or something like that, and you could get 3 at once. So what you end up with is a little manual. Oh, a little manual. I say a little manual. It's a leaflet sort of thing. Tells you how to load the game, and there's a fun little map on the back. And then what I'm guessing is that these cases were really meant for Vita games, you know, like replacement cases, not official things. Because SD cards don't actually fit in there, so you end up with a little holder. But it's all kind of cute, waiting for the wonderful Spectrum Next to be played. And then bought another one sometime later, Dweeb's Drop, and it's the same sort of thing. And I'd even forgotten about that, this little badge as well, or a pin I suppose if you call them in America. And again, the game ready and waiting to be played for the very first time. I've had these for quite some time now. And my wife, knowing that I like music, she knows that I don't know how to play an instrument, but she knew that I was interested on the Spectrum Next having 3 lots of the sound chip that it has in there, and there was chances of a SID chip move backwards and forwards on that. I believe you still can play SID stuff, but not through this software, but you know, other stuff. So she sent off and got me this for one of the many, I don't know, Christmas, birthday, anniversary, I can't remember which one it was now, but she sent off for this, which has been updated a few times. You get an email, it's to her email address, but you get an email and it lets you know that there's an update, and you get all of the update. So I've still got to do that yet. So whatever version this is, when it came out, when it was bought at the time, is still on there. I've not updated it. I will do, of course, when it comes to using it for the first time. And then let me just pause and move this out of the way, because there is something I want to show you with this little lot. Well, the Spectrum Next comes with 2 joystick ports at the bottom, just below the keyboard, and I sort of get the feeling they're going to be in the way when typing. I don't know, don't have the Spectrum Next. It's a little thing I've been a little bit worried about. I'm not the only one that's been a little bit worried about that. Lots of people just say, well, stick on a PS2 keyboard. Yeah, well, not everyone's got the space for yet another keyboard when there's already a keyboard here. So, my little idea, which plenty of people have come up before. I remember Dr. Andrew from the Back Office Show had spoken about this years ago. He did it for his Atari ST, I think it was, but he actually bought the type where you've got to solder. With these ones, if it will get focused, as it has little bits that slice into the cable, so you don't have to do any soldering. Now this was some 10 core wire, but there was a brown one going over there, and I've peeled that away because obviously I only need 9. And my idea is that I'll line it up, put the back on, squeeze really hard, maybe even get, you know, some chunky pliers and squeeze it together, and then making sure that, you know, the contacts are correct before sticking it into the computer. You know, so the pins match up properly. They should do. I don't think it really matters if you do it upside down or not, because if you do it, say like this has 5 across the top and then this one has 5 across the top, you would know that it would match up visually, maybe. But if it was upside down, it would still line up, because the ones that you want will be missed at the sides of here and caught at the bottom at this side. So I don't think there's a problem of having them a different twist, but really what's the point of having it twisted? I realise the cable would still be flat, but what would be the point of twisting it? Because after all, you're just wanting joystick ports, aren't you? So you might also just make sure it's 5 across the top, 5 across the top, plug into the computer, that would plug the wire coming across, you know, like that, and then the joystick plugs in there. But then that means though, when I'm typing, if hopefully I'm not catching the back end of here and I'm just resting my hand on a little bit of ribbon cable, because for me it's probably just going to be one player anyway. That's the idea anyway. And then for the final finale, I'm going to have to open up the computer and stick in the extra megabyte, which will be fun because you actually have to, going from Nostalgia Nerds video, you have to open it up, take the motherboard out of the case, actually unscrew it from the case, and then stick that in, and then screw it all back together again. So that's the fun and joy that I've got yet to do. I'm still waiting, as I say, for Spectrum Next. I hope that's been interesting for people, for all different types of computers really, but for the people that are still waiting for their Spectrum Next, maybe this is a little bit of a shopping list you want to get your hands on. As I say, I'll put some links in the description, maybe not at the time of uploading, but they will be there eventually over the weekend. As always, happy gaming!